A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You ever get that feeling where you've built something perfectly suited for your own life, but then you move 5 feet to the left to a different device, and suddenly you're back in the Stone Ages? Today's prompt from Daniel hits on exactly that. He's been cranking out so many custom tools thanks to AI that he's hitting a classic developer wall. He's got these great deb packages for Ubuntu and APKs for Android, but every time he switches from his desktop to his laptop, he's stuck in this loop of manual updates. It's the "it works on my machine" problem, but the machine is his other machine.
It is the ultimate first-world developer problem, isn't it? Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, Daniel's situation is becoming incredibly common. When you're an indie dev, or just someone who automates their life heavily, you start creating this bespoke software ecosystem. But a tool is only as good as its availability. If you have to manually skeep a file and run a dpkg command every time you fix a bug, you just traded one manual task for another. By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash, which is fitting because we are talking about the high-speed evolution of developer workflows.
I love that we're at the point where we're talking about personal distribution pipelines. It sounds so corporate and heavy, but it's actually about freedom. Daniel wants to know if he can run his own authenticated PPA and manage public versus private repositories without losing his mind. And honestly, Herman, I suspect you've got a spreadsheet somewhere of exactly how to do this, because this smells like a deep dive topic you've been Obsidian noting for months.
You know me too well. The short answer is yes, and it's actually more mature than people realize. We aren't just talking about hosted services like Launchpad or the Play Store. We're talking about taking the tools the big boys use, Aptly, Reprepro, and F-Droid server, and scaling them down to fit on a cheap VPS or even a home server. The beauty of the Linux and Android ecosystems is that the plumbing for software updates is actually quite modular. If you can host a static file and sign it with a GPG key, you can be your own Canonical. You can be your own Google.
Being my own Google sounds like a lot of responsibility. I can barely manage my own lunch. But seriously, let's start with the Linux side. Daniel's mentioned .deb files. Usually, when we think of a PPA, we think of that add apt repository command, where we trust some random dev on the internet. How does a single person set that up for themselves so their laptop just sees the updates?
The magic word here is Reprepro, or if you want to get fancy, Aptly. Let's start with Reprepro because it describes exactly what's happening under the hood. It's a tool that takes your .deb files and builds a folder structure that follows the Debian repository standard. It creates the packages file, the release file, and most importantly, it signs them. When you run apt update on your laptop, the system isn't doing anything magical. It's just downloading a text file from a server, checking if the signature matches a key you've trusted, and seeing if the version number is higher than what's installed.
So it's essentially just a very organized web server. If I put a folder on a website and point apt at it, am I halfway there?
Precisely. Well, I shouldn't say precisely, but you're on the right track. It's a static site. That's the genius of it. You don't need a complex database or a heavy backend. You just need a place to host files. The hard part, if you can call it that, is the GPG signing. Your laptop needs to know that the package coming from Daniel's server actually came from Daniel. So you generate a GPG key, use Reprepro to sign the repository metadata, and then you add that public key to your laptop's trusted keys. Once that's done, your laptop treats Daniel's personal server with the same institutional respect it gives to the official Ubuntu mirrors.
I like the idea of my laptop showing institutional respect to a folder sitting on a Raspberry Pi in a closet. But Daniel had a specific twist. He wants to maintain a public repo for his open source stuff and a private authenticated one for the secret sauce or personal configurations. How do you handle that private part without making the files world readable?
This is where we move from the repository tool to the web server configuration. You can use something like Nginx or Caddy to host the files. For the public stuff, you just let it be. For the private stuff, you put it behind HTTP basic auth. Now, you might think, wait, can apt handle a username and password? And the answer is yes. You don't put the credentials in the sources.list file where they might leak. Instead, you use a file on your laptop located at etsy. You put your credentials in there, and when apt tries to hit that specific URL, it automatically injects the login info. It's seamless. Once it's set up, you never think about it again.
That sounds like a dream for someone like Daniel, who is constantly hopping between devices. But let's talk about the friction. Setting up Reprepro sounds fine for a one-off, but Daniel's a tech comms and automation guy. He's going to want this to be a pipeline. If he pushes code to GitHub, he doesn't want to then have to manually run Reprepro on a server. What's the pro version of this workflow?
The Pro version, the Daniel version, is using GitHub Actions as the engine. Imagine this: Daniel writes his code, pushes to a private repo. A GitHub action triggers, builds the dep package using a tool like dpkgdeb or fpm, and then, here's the clever bit, it uses rclone or ssh to push that dep to his personal server. On that server, a small script or a file watch trigger sees the new file and tells Reprepro to include it in the repository. Within seconds, his laptop gets a notification that an update is available. He's essentially built his own private CI/CD pipeline that ends on his hardware.
It's basically a DIY version of what the big tech companies do, but without the 3-hour meetings and the Jira tickets. I'm curious about the Android side of things, though. Android is notoriously more locked down than Linux when it comes to installing things outside the Play Store. Daniel mentioned APKs and F-Droid. Is it the same deal? Just a signed folder on a server?
It's remarkably similar, but the tool of choice is F-Droid Server. F-Droid isn't just an app store, it's a standard. The F-Droid Server tool lets you point a command at a folder full of APKs, and it generates an index.xml or an entry.json file. It also handles the signing. You then host that folder on any web server. On your phone, you open the F-Droid client, add your custom URL, and boom, you have your own personal app store.
Does the F-Droid client handle authentication? Because if I'm building a custom app that, I don't know, unlocks my front door or manages my personal finances, I definitely don't want that APK floating around where anyone can download and reverse engineer it.
It does. You can actually bake the credentials right into the repository URL in the F-Droid app, or use the same basic auth logic we discussed for Linux. What's really cool about the F-Droid ecosystem is that it supports internal updates. If Daniel builds a new version of his app, the F-Droid client on his phone will see the version bump in the index file and prompt him to update, just like the Play Store would. It solves that manual update fatigue entirely.
I'm starting to see why this is a growing trend for indie devs. The barrier to entry for being a distributor has dropped through the floor. But let's look at the complexity. If I'm Daniel, and I have 5 tools on Ubuntu and 3 apps on Android, am I spending more time maintaining the distribution pipe than I am actually writing the tools? Is there a point where this becomes over-engineering for one?
That's the classic developer trap, isn't it? I spent 6 hours automating a 6-minute task, but in this case, the maintenance is almost zero once the initial plumbing is in place. If you use a tool like Aptly instead of Reprepro, you get even more power. Aptly lets you take snapshots. So if Daniel pushes a buggy version of his tool to his laptop and it breaks his workflow, he can roll back the entire repository to a previous snapshot with one command. That kind of safety is hard to get with manual file transfers.
I like that safety angle. It turns your personal tools from fragile scripts I'm afraid to touch into actual software. But let's talk about the why here. Why is this happening now? Daniel mentioned AI maturity. I'm guessing he's saying that because AI is making it so much faster to write these tools. The bottleneck has shifted from how do I code this to how do I deploy this.
Spot on. When it took you 3 weeks to write a utility script, you didn't mind a 5-minute manual install. But now, If you can describe a problem to a model and get a working .deb package in 10 minutes, the manual deployment becomes 50% of the total time spent. That's a massive friction point. We're seeing a shift where deployment as code is becoming a personal necessity, not just an enterprise one.
It's like we're all becoming mini IT departments for our own lives. I mean, Daniel's originally from Ireland, now in Jerusalem, working in tech comms. He's clearly a guy who moves around, both physically and digitally. Having a cloud-native approach to his own local tools makes sense. But what about the hardware? Do you need a beefy server to run these repository managers?
Not at all. These tools are incredibly lightweight. Reprepro and F-Droid server are just generating static metadata. You could run the build process on your main desktop, sync the resulting folder to a $5 a month VPS, or even a static host like GitHub Pages for the public stuff. The actual hosting is just serving files. The computing happens when you generate the index, which takes seconds. The real investment is in the initial setup of the GPG keys and the web server config.
Let's talk about those GPG keys for a second, because that's usually where people start screaming and pulling their hair out. If Daniel wants his laptop to trust his desktop, he's got to manage those keys. Is there a GPG for Dummies version of this? Or do we just have to embrace the pain of the command line?
There's no avoiding the command line entirely, but the workflow is simpler than it used to be. You generate a key pair. You keep the private key on your build machine, the one running Reprepro. You export the public key, move it to the laptop, and run apt key add, or the more modern equivalent of dropping it into etsecjaptrusted.gpg.dc. The biggest hurdle is just making sure you don't lose that private key. If you lose it, you can't update your repo anymore, and you have to go around to all your client devices and tell them to trust a new key.
Which for Daniel is just 2 machines. But if he starts sharing these tools with friends or family, or if his son Ezra grows up and wants to use dad's custom apps, suddenly you're managing an org. It's a slippery slope from I want to sync my laptop to I am the sysadmin for my extended family.
And that's actually a great point. These tools scale. If Daniel's open source tools on GitHub start getting traction, he's already got the infrastructure to provide a professional grade repository for his users. Instead of telling people to download this random deb and hope for the best, he can say, add my PPA. It builds instant credibility. It shows you care about the life cycle of the software, not just the initial release.
It's the difference between a pop-up shop and a brick-and-mortar store. One feels temporary, the other feels like it has a foundation. I want to go back to the private APK thing, though. Android has been getting more aggressive with its play protect warnings. If Daniel installs his own app from his own F-Droid repo, is his phone going to scream at him every 5 minutes that he's installing malware?
It'll give him the initial unknown sources warning, but once he's toggled that for the F-Droid app, it's actually quite smooth. The real trick is to sign the APKs with a consistent developer key. If the key matches, Android treats it as a legitimate update to the existing app. If he changes the key, he has to uninstall and reinstall. So, just like with the GPG keys for Linux, the secret sauce is just good old-fashioned key management.
It always comes back to keys. It's like the digital version of losing your car keys, except if you lose these, you lose access to your own labor. You mentioned a tool called Aptly earlier and called it the Swiss Army knife. What does it do that Reprepro doesn't? Why would Daniel pick one over the other?
Reprepro is great if you have a very static workflow. I have a file, put it in the repo, done. Aptly is for when you want to get sophisticated. It treats repositories like a version-controlled system. You can have a staging repo where you test things and then publish that staging repo to your production endpoint. It also handles mirroring effortlessly. If Daniel wanted to mirror a specific subset of the official Ubuntu repos alongside his own tools, maybe to ensure he always has a specific version of a dependency, Aptly can do that. It's more for the power user who wants total control over the environment.
I feel like Daniel is definitely in the total control camp. If you're building your own tools with AI, you're already someone who isn't satisfied with the off-the-shelf world. You're building a bespoke digital life.
And there's a philosophical point here too. By self-hosting his distribution, Daniel is opting out of the centralized store model. He's not beholden to Google's whims on the Play Store or Canonical's decisions for the main Ubuntu repos. If he wants to keep an old version of a tool alive because it works perfectly for his workflow, he can. He is the curator.
The curator of the Daniel verse. I like it. But let's talk about the merge debt and configuration drift mentioned in the background notes. If he's maintaining a public repo on GitHub and a private repo on his own server, how does he keep them from diverging into a mess?
That's where the unified distribution pipeline comes in. He should use the same build scripts for both. The only difference should be the destination, tag in his CI/CD. Public builds go to GitHub pages, private builds go to his authenticated VPS. If he treats them as two branches of the same process, he avoids that drift. The goal is to make the public versus private distinction a matter of routing, not a matter of manual effort.
It's like having two different mailboxes for the same house. One's for the public, one's for the family. But the mail carrier, the GitHub action, doesn't care. It just drops the package where it's told.
That's a great way to put it. And for someone like Daniel, who is technically literate and already using tools like GitHub and NPM, this is just the final mile of his automation journey. He's already automated the creation phase with AI. Now he's automating the consumption phase.
It's funny. We spent years talking about the cloud as this big scary thing owned by Amazon and Google. But now, the cloud is just a set of protocols that we can run ourselves. I can have a Daniel cloud or a corn cloud. It's a very pro-sovereignty way of looking at tech, which I know we both appreciate.
It really is. It's about taking those enterprise-grade tools, the stuff that makes the world run, and realizing they aren't magic, they're just well-documented standards. If you can read a man page and configure a web server, you can have the same level of infrastructure as a mid-sized software house.
All right, I'm sold. I'm going to go home and set up a repository for my collection of sloth-themed terminal themes. But before we wrap this up, let's give Daniel some concrete first steps. If he's sitting at his desk right now, what's the first thing he should install to get this moving?
Step 1. Install Reprepro on his server. It's the easiest point of entry. Get a basic repo working with 1.deb file. Step 2. Set up an Nginx site to serve that folder. Step 3. Add the URL to his laptop and see the beautiful one package can be upgraded. Message. Once he feels that dopamine hit of an automated update, he'll be motivated to set up the GitHub Actions and the F-Droid server.
That one package can be upgraded. Message is the developer version of a thinking of you text. It's just your computer letting you know it's ready for the latest and greatest.
And for the Android side, he should look at the F-Droid server package. It's a bit more involved to set up than Reprepro, but the documentation is excellent. He can even use a simple Python script to watch a folder and run the F-Droid update command whenever a new APK appears.
It sounds like he's got a fun weekend project ahead of him. Or, knowing Daniel, he'll have it done by the time this episode finishes playing.
Probably. When you've got AI helping you with the config files, the weekend project becomes the lunch break project.
Well, I think we've covered the how and the why. It's all about closing that loop from creation to installation. No more manual skippying like it's 1999.
Amen to that. The future is pull-based, not push-based. Let your devices do the work of staying up to date.
Before we sign off, I want to make sure we hit the practical takeaways. Number 1. Reprepro for simple Linux repos, aptly if you want snapshots and complexity. Number 2. F-Droid server for your Android apps. Number 3. HTTP basic auth for privacy. And don't forget the authconfd file on the client side. And number 4. Use GitHub Actions to tie it all together so you never have to manually run a build command again.
Perfect summary. It's all about reducing the friction between I have an idea and I am using that idea on all my devices.
That's the dream. Well, this has been a great deep dive. I actually feel like I understand GPG keys about 5% more than I did 20 minutes ago, which is a record for me.
I'll take that as a win. It's a complex world, but the tools are finally catching up to the needs of the individual developer.
Huge thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. It's tools like theirs that make this kind of high-level discussion possible.
If you found this useful, or if you've built your own personal distribution pipeline and have some tips we missed, reach out to us. We love hearing how people are actually implementing this stuff in the wild.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app helps us reach more curious minds like Daniel's.
Find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and all the ways to subscribe. Until next time.
Stay curious and keep those repos signed. Goodbye.
Good.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow